Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Symptom Control and Quality of Life Committee. If you're checking your brochure, if that's where you intended to be, you're in the right place. I'm Michael Fish on behalf of Lynn Henry. Welcome to our meeting. So just some routine disclosures here. I have another employment here, and Lynn has one disclosure we wanted to share. And I know that a lot of you are navigating other meetings, so just giving you a glimpse of sort of how our meeting will be structured in terms of today's agenda. Give you a chance to take that in. And just acknowledging the leadership of our committee with our executive officer and stats team, our patient advocate, our VA representative, our clinical trials manager, and our protocol coordinator. And so it takes a big group to put it together, and wanted to acknowledge everybody's contributions. We always remind ourselves of what our vision is, to be the best environment for the development and implementation and conduct of clinical trials that create a new understanding of the mechanism of symptoms and new methods to reduce suffering. And as you can see, we have key attributes about being multidisciplinary and having strong early investigator participation and being creative and patient-centered, and really tapping into the skillful NCORE network colleagues. To reduce suffering, you've got to sort of have a model of the person. And, we think about suffering as things that challenge the intactness of the person. Every person has a perceived future and a story and a body and families. And so there's a lot of things to pay attention to as we construct our trials, and a lot of choices to make. And so we make some choices about what priority topics we're going to have. We can't boil the ocean, but we have some priorities in our clinical focus and our methodologic focus. And a lot of our focus has been physical issues that are attributed to treatment toxicity, as you can see, CIPN and other toxicity issues. But there's always a wild card in the deck for other emerging things. So we're not shutting ourselves down to other things that are ripe, where you have, if you're thinking of an idea that's not on this list, that doesn't mean you're out of scope. It just you just got to play the wild card here. And we also have our some methodologic focus, and as you can see, and we're really interested in meaningful interventional trials, but sometimes we start with prospective cohort studies so we can characterize emerging symptoms and really set ourselves up to be able to plan and implement the interventional trials successfully. All right, with that work, we figure out what our measures of success are, and you'll notice in the course of the meeting, we'll be discussing these kind of things. We'll be discussing new ideas, studies that are in development, how things are launching and accruing, and publications, right? So we're going to touch on all these kind of things, and we have measures of success for process excellence as well. We're trying to make an impact for patients, right? The patients are the center of what we're doing. And now Lynn Henry is going to introduce our keynote speaker.
Yeah, so I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Michelle Malika. She is the Deputy Director of the NCI Office of Cancer Survivorship. And in that role, she develops, supports, and promotes research efforts focused specifically on cancer survivorship. So you may wonder why in the world we have her talking in the symptom control and quality of life meeting, but there's a lot of overlap, as you've heard. And so we think what she has to say today will be really relevant for hopefully everybody here. She's also program director in the outcomes research branch of the Healthcare Delivery Research Program. And in that role, she manages a research portfolio of grants that are focused on cancer survivorship as well as healthcare delivery across the life course. She trained at the Columbia University School of Nursing, got a Master's of Science in Nursing Education from Damon College, a PhD in Nursing Science from Musk in South Carolina, and an MPH in Community Health and Behavior from the University of Buffalo. She was also an NCI Cancer Prevention Fellow and worked clinically as an oncology nurse. So incredibly well-rounded, very relevant. And we look forward to hearing her talk, which is entitled Survivorship Needs for Patients Living with Advanced and Metastatic Cancer. So, Michelle, we look forward to hearing from you. And we can advance your slides if that's easier.
Perfect. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. And hopefully you can all hear me okay. Thank you so much for that introduction, Dr. Henry. And thank you to you all for welcoming me. I'm sorry that I can't join you in person. And thank you to Dr. Fish and Dr. Henry for this invitation. I'm really excited to be speaking with you today about survivorship needs for people living with advanced and metastatic cancer. I am presenting this on behalf of several colleagues at the NCI, but particularly Dr. Lisa Galicchio, who co-leads this effort with me. You can go ahead to the next slide, please. Thank you. Today, I will be presenting some background information about this topic and population. I'll talk through some of NCI's efforts, some areas we see as next steps, as well as a recently released RFA or request for applications. Next slide. I'll just start by providing some background. As you all know, the NCI defines a cancer survivor as any person from the time of their cancer diagnosis through the balance of life. You can go ahead and click through this, please. This definition was recently updated to recognize that there are many different types of cancer survivors, including those living with cancer and those free from cancer. This term is meant to capture a population rather than provide a label, so it's important to note that the term survivor may not resonate with all individuals. Next slide, please. There are currently over 18 million cancer survivors in the United States. Sorry, you can go ahead and go back one. And this number is expected to grow to over 26 million by 2040. At the same time, there has been an increase in the number of metastatic and advanced cancer survivors. So these two figures show on the left the increasing projected prevalence of metastatic breast cancer, as well as on the right, the decline in lung cancer deaths in the US, half of which are diagnosed as advanced cancer. And taken together, the current literature suggests there is a growing number of people with metastatic or advanced cancer and that they are living longer. Next slide, please. We recently used SEER data to estimate the number of people living with the most prevalent metastatic cancer types. We found that collectively in 2018, there were over 623,000 people living with metastatic cancer, and this number is expected to grow to over 690,000 by 2025. Next slide, please. You can also see in the next figure that there are several cancers. It's not flipping on my side, just so that you all know. There are several cancers where a proportion of people are between 5 to 10 and over 10 years from diagnosis. Sorry, the slides aren't, there we go. Thank you so much. So you can see the time from diagnosis here on this slide. Next slide, please. Individuals living with advanced or metastatic cancer have in common the fact that they are experiencing what may be treatable, but is likely incurable cancer. This term refers to individuals who are diagnosed with advanced cancer that is likely incurable, as well as those who are diagnosed with or progress to metastatic cancer. You can go ahead and click through this slide, please. We want to acknowledge that there isn't a perfect term to refer to this group of survivors. We're trying to use this term just to closely describe our target population. This group of survivors includes many cancer types, and these individuals may cycle on and off treatment and have periods with and without disease. These survivors include, but are not limited to, those treated with targeted therapies or immunotherapies. Next slide, please. To illustrate this population further, I wanted to provide an example survivor profile. So John Smith was diagnosed with stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer. He was predicted to survive less than 3 years at the time of his diagnosis. He was originally treated with 4 cycles of chemotherapy, but experienced tumor growth, at which time he received additional chemotherapy and experienced disease control. After 6 years, he experienced subsequent tumor growth and was treated with cycles of targeted therapy for 3 years. And most recently, after disease progression, an EGFR mutation analysis was performed, and he was treated with an additional targeted therapy for over 1 year with disease control. Next slide, please. Today, John Smith has survived over 11 years since his cancer diagnosis. You can go ahead and click, thank you. While he has survived far longer than expected when he was originally diagnosed, John continues to experience long-term physical symptoms and psychological concerns, including scan anxiety, uncertainty, and fear of cancer progression, financial hardship related to costly treatments, waning caregiver support given the long care trajectory of his cancer, and substantial issues coordinating care among his multiple providers. Next slide, please. As you saw with that example case, individuals and people living with likely incurable cancers are treated with the intention of controlling or curing their disease and often cycle on and off treatment if their positive clinical response to treatment is not durable or they experience progression or growth of their cancer. Historically, we've focused on survivorship after treatment ends, but for people living with likely incurable cancers, their survivorship needs are complex. And as a result, survivorship care is essential from the time of diagnosis forward. We also want to acknowledge that we're challenging how people think of survivorship care, and we're really focusing on the needs of this growing group of people living longer with likely incurable cancers. Next slide, please. This figure just acknowledges that there are survivorship needs at different stages. And for those who are diagnosed with advanced or metastatic cancer or who progress to metastatic cancer, their goals of care may be to be treated with the intent to prolong life, but also, most importantly, to attend to quality of life and survivorship needs. Next slide, please. So you might be asking, what do we mean when we say what is survivorship care? The National Academy of Medicine called for comprehensive survivorship care that includes prevention and surveillance for recurrence and new cancers, surveillance and management for the effects of cancer and its treatment, as well as health promotion and preventive care. These complex needs necessitate the delivery of comprehensive coordinated care that often involves multiple providers. Next slide. In recognition of this growing population of people living with advanced and metastatic cancer, the NCI has recently conducted several initial activities, including a review of the NIH grant portfolio, discussions with survivors, advocates, clinicians, researchers, and advocacy organizations. And in 2021, we led a virtual meeting focused on the topic. The overall goal here was to better understand the gap areas in survivorship research for this population. Next slide, please. And I'll start just by describing what we are currently funding in this area. So we did a recent portfolio analysis to describe current NIH-funded grants focused on people living with advanced and metastatic cancer and to identify some gap areas. It's important to note that while the NCI has invested substantial funds in survivorship science for decades, much of this research has targeted the needs of survivors diagnosed at earlier stages and supporting survivors during and after treatment to manage short and long-term impacts of cancer and its treatment. We've also had several past efforts focused on end-of-life care for individuals who were diagnosed with cancer at later stages. So for this portfolio analysis, we examined all NIH-funded grants focused on individuals living with advanced and metastatic cancer. We identified 25 grants funded across 4 NIH institutes, with NCI funding the majority of the grants. Most of the grants were funded using the R01 mechanism, but there were also funded R21s, R03s, and training grants. Next slide, please. So when examining the primary area of focus, out of a total of 25 grants, 7 focused on the implementation of early palliative and supportive care, 6 focused on providing psychosocial support, 5 on physiological sequelae, and 3 focused on health behaviors, with all of those being focused on physical activity. And the majority of grants were intervention studies. Next slide, please. To further explore the state of research in this area, we then led a virtual meeting focused on this population and survivorship needs. It was held in May of 2021. Next slide, please. And I should say I'm happy to share these slides after, and there are some links in there with the resources to the meeting and to the publications. So the goals of this meeting really were to define the current state of survivorship research focused on this population, to identify health and supportive care needs, and to discuss research gaps and opportunities in several areas. Next slide, please. We had over 300 attendees at this meeting, which we were thrilled with, given that it was a sort of newer focus for this population. You can see from this pie chart that attendees included researchers and clinicians, but we had 10% of attendees who identified themselves as patients, survivors, caregivers, or advocates. Next slide, please. I wanted to provide just a brief overview of what we covered at this meeting, and the agenda and materials are all found online as well. In this, we started with a keynote presentation by Dr. Ryan Knipp, and we had an engaging survivor patient panel where they shared their experiences across an array of topics. We also then had 5 scientific sessions. Each scientific session included subject matter experts presenting on specific topics, followed by an interactive panel discussion with presenters and additional experts, as well as a survivor who shared their perspective on that specific topic. And you can see here that the scientific sessions were focused on symptom management, epidemiology and surveillance, psychosocial research, healthcare delivery research, and health behaviors. And throughout the discussions, we captured gap areas and opportunities for future work. Next slide, please. So through the portfolio analysis and the stakeholder meeting, we identified numerous evidence gaps, including a need to better understand clinical, genomic, and lifestyle factors associated with improved outcomes and better quality of life, the types and trajectories of physical and psychological symptoms, especially over time, the impact of prognostic awareness on patients and caregivers, and strategies to enhance provider communication of prognostic information, the need to develop and test innovative models of healthcare delivery, and interventional research to determine the best ways to improve quality of care and quality of life for individuals living with likely incurable cancers. Next slide, please. We also recognize some cross-cutting opportunities across the scientific areas, including the need to identify existing research resources to answer questions pertaining to these populations, to include the survivor perspective in all phases of research, to investigate and address disparities among those living with advanced and metastatic cancer, and to address and understand the needs of the caregiver-survivor dyad as they relate to things like financial hardship, decision-making, and prognostic uncertainty. Next slide, please. So based on these gaps, NCI has been focusing on 5 key areas. You should be seeing more on this to come from NCI, but first there is a need to promote grant applications. I'll talk about that in just a second. As I mentioned, we also need to promote efforts to identify the population in SEER registry data, as well as EMR and claims data. Attendees also recognize the need to assess and enhance available data resources. And in fact, on our Office of Cancer Survivorship website, we now have identified data resources that include people living with advanced and metastatic cancer. And finally, there is a need to understand unmet needs and to enhance awareness of the need for research in this area. Next slide, please. So one of the most recent activities is that we recently released a request for applications entitled Research to Understand and Address the Survivorship Needs of Individuals Living with Advanced Cancer. The purpose of this funding opportunity is to support studies that aim to better understand or address survivorship needs for this population. There's 2 receipt dates for this RFA. One was last September in 2022, and the second is this September in 2023. I've included a few links here, the link to the webinar information, as well as the actual RFA. Specifically, this RFA is intended to solicit applications proposing observational studies to understand the trajectory of physical and psychological symptoms, patterns of care, or unmet needs, and the development and testing of interventions to improve the delivery of comprehensive survivorship care for these survivors. Next slide, please. Thank you. Example observational research topics include an examination of factors associated with physical and psychological symptoms and other survivorship outcomes, determining the components of survivorship care that can reduce barriers and optimize outcomes, and understanding the impact of living longer with advanced and metastatic cancer on outcomes such as employment and financial concerns, especially given changing care trajectories and delivery of innovative and yet often more costly treatments. Next slide, please. Example interventional topics include the development and testing of models of survivorship care to improve outcomes and address issues, including care coordination, management of comorbid conditions, management of changing symptom trajectories, psychological needs, financial concerns, and support for the survivor caregiver dyad, as well as interventions to address decision-making and patient-provider communication in the context of prognostic awareness. Next slide, please. Studies submitted to this RFA can include any population of individuals living with likely incurable cancers and diagnosed at any age. Populations may be defined by a single cancer diagnosis or multiple primary cancer diagnoses and cancer treatment modalities or other characteristics as appropriate and with justification. Proposed studies must focus on the survivor and measure outcomes at the survivor level, but can also include caregivers, providers, and health system level targets. In addition, studies should include appropriate clinical data, including biomarker and radiologic data to characterize treatment response, toxicities, and disease status. We have a strong interest in proposals that focus on individuals living with likely incurable cancer who are treated with newer therapies and those that include diverse populations, as you see here. And it's also important to note that development and testing of cancer-directed therapies and studies focused exclusively on end-of-life care would not be considered responsive to this RFA. Next slide, please. I will close by saying that there is a lot of work to be done in this area, and you all are the experts. So I hope that if you have something you're considering submitting, we hope that you will reach out and talk with us. There is so much to be done to improve quality of life for these survivors. Our efforts are in direct response to key gap areas identified by NCI and external stakeholders. We are hoping to enhance understanding of symptoms, care patterns, and unmet needs, and to increase effective strategies to improve survivorship care delivery and improve outcomes for this growing population. Next slide, please. And finally, I would be remiss if I didn't thank all of the survivors and advocates who participated in the NCI meeting, as well as the follow-up efforts. This is an engaged group who has lots of input and valuable perspectives that we've tried to incorporate along the way. Thanks again for the opportunity to be with you all today, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much. Is this actually working? Yes. Okay. That was a fabulous talk. I think this is definitely food for thought for all of us who are here. We have a track record of doing some of these sort of observational longitudinal studies looking at predictors of development of various symptoms, whether it be the immunotherapy associated toxicities, whether it's related to chemotherapy-induced neuropathy. And so, thinking about those types of studies, it seems like it would fit really nicely here, but thinking specifically about the population, whether it's men with prostate cancer who are on, who have hormone sensitive disease and are on treatment for a long time, or similarly men with hormone receptor positive breast cancer or HER2 positive breast cancer who may be, on a single type of treatment for a long time, which could be causing a lot of difficulty with quality of life, but is obviously essential to keep taking because it's beneficial. And so, these are different things that, we would love people to be brainstorming about, come to us with ideas. We are going to hear about an idea in a minute that someone has already proposed that fits in this patient population space. So I encourage people to come to the mics if you have any questions or comments.
And maybe I'll just chime in, Dr. Henry, that Although the RFA has one more receipt date in September, this is an area that we are championing. So it will continue to be a priority. There's a lot of work to be done, as you saw, and we can't accomplish it with a single RFA. So if you have ideas, we would encourage you to reach out, even if you can't make a September deadline.
I was just reflecting on the sort of disruptive nature of our success, right? The better we do with some of our newer treatments, it affects the way we design our trials, how we recruit patients, and how and where we'll be following them over time. You know, you can tell that this topic influences not only our committee and survivorship, but also the Cancer Care Delivery Committee and the Palliative End of Life Committee. And I was thinking of sort of where metastatic patients are in the first place, right? A lot of them are in subspecialty clinics when they're actively being treated. And then they sometimes go to survivorship clinics with specific criteria, which may be needing to change over time, you know, to sort of debulk the active clinics. And then some are in palliative care clinics, and some are in phase 1 early investigation kind of clinics. So there's a lot of places in the current system where these patients are popping up. Dawn, did you have a question?
Yeah, I didn't know if there was a definition of a long-term metastatic cancer survivor. Like it's a different issue of people that live long-term with the disease than it is, when you say like survivorship starts the date of diagnosis, it's two different issues, right? And so when you think methodologically about what your cohort would be, is it people that have lived X number of years with metastatic cancer, or, I didn't know if there was anything in the literature that looks at, not just the population of people living with metastatic disease, but people that are living like at least 5 years with metastatic disease or that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's Dr. Hirschman, but I can't see you. So thank you for your question. So there isn't, to my knowledge, a clear definition of sort of living with advanced and metastatic cancer. That being said, in speaking with investigators, they've proposed a number of different definitions. Some have been that they are predicted to live for a certain period of time after their diagnosis. It is definitely a shorter trajectory. I would say we haven't seen grants submitted with sort of 5 years after diagnosis, and that could be just feasibility. And for this RFA, we did not define it on purpose because based on cancer type, it could be different, but we definitely left it up to the investigator to try to justify, and that's a challenge in and of itself.
In the area of integrative oncology interventions, there are many interventions that are available that are actually quite good. For example, IV anti-inflammatories for CIPN, for neuropathy, but they're not covered by insurance. They have other issues that are really challenging. In terms of grants, how far out is NCI willing to go?
Thanks for your question. Can you say a little bit more about what you mean in terms of how far out are we willing to go?
Is there a limit to the kinds of interventions that NCI will support?
No, there isn't. Yeah, we've definitely, you mentioned integrative oncology. We did have applications on some even complementary therapies. So I think if the evidence base is there and the preliminary work is there, we're willing to consider it.
Great one-word answer. Thank you.
I'm going to do one question from the chat. So the question is, dyad studies are proving to be difficult to accrue to, such as we heard about yesterday if you were at the CCDR meeting. Can you please talk a little bit about how studies could incorporate dyads a bit more often? For example, making caregivers, spouses, optional participants for a subsection of studies.
Yeah, absolutely. So caregiving is one of the portfolios that I have worked on, and it's in my sort of area, I would say that investigators are having a lot of difficulty, which it sounds like you had a discussion about. I think we might need to start thinking about some more pragmatic approaches in terms of recruitment and being flexible in our recruitment opportunities. So not relying only on dyads, although I know it's rich to enroll both caregiver and survivor patient dyads. I think sometimes we need to be more flexible, particularly in this population. A lot of questions that are coming up is what happens if the patient does pass away? Could you include the caregiver, the bereaved caregiver after that point? So I think those are questions to consider. You just need to be sort of flexible in your approach.
Mark O'Rourke from Greenville. I'm the co-chair of the Palliative and End-of-Life Care Committee. And I'm listening to your comments about the definition of advanced cancer survivorship, the openness to studies addressing awareness of prognosis and communication, but the cautionary not to be limited to end-of-life care. And as I reflect on the diagnosis of a person, or the definition of advanced cancer, is some people don't realize how close to end-of-life care they are. And that is the nature of the interventions we're working on. Could you help? We have some investigators planning interventions to help with prognosis, understanding, and they're selecting out people with prognoses limited to 6 months or a year or 2 years. How can we separate that from being excluded in the end-of-life care category?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of, thank you for your question. We've had a lot of discussion internally about kind of the overlap between survivorship and palliative care. We actually had Dr. Laura Petrillo did a talk as part of our OCS seminar series on that very topic. I think there's so many overlapping concepts, right? For this RFA, we were trying to focus on things that were not represented in the portfolio already. But more and more, I think, given our broad definition of survivor and survivorship, we need to consider end-of-life care. I will tell you that what we're seeing in the applications is less. So it sounds like your time frame, 6 months to a year, is a little like, so we're seeing applications that they are including those individuals who they tend to be excluding are people that where they are on hospice care. Death is sort of imminent, although I know that's so difficult to tell. So it's more geared towards those people who are facing an uncertain trajectory, but have the potential to perhaps live for a period of time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I was kind of trying to imagine a concept coming through for a caregiver intervention or some other kind of maybe a telehealth intervention for a metastatic solid tumor patient, and imagining that maybe the criteria would be a patient without progression after 2 or more years on, maybe it's immunotherapy or some other therapy, where their care has been de-escalated to where they've either, stopped that therapy, or they've changed their clinic setting from an active to a survivorship clinic, or they're being seen maybe every 6 months, no more than twice a year. I'm just imagining that sort of design. And then imagining the PI having to figure out how to get those patients recruited at a SWOG meeting. How many committees would you have to be scouting, talking to, and promoting to find these patients, because they'll be coming out of a lot of places. And so, that's the challenge. I know Dr. Gunturu has faced this challenge with S2013. If it's a modality of therapy, a toxicity across a category of drugs, you have the same problem. But so new challenges with this
Yes.
kind of thing. And I think it brings care delivery challenges too, because we have a certain amount of resources. Like we expect a certain sort of throughput. I was even thinking about Dr. Melangi's presentation in cancer care delivery research yesterday, where there might be a care navigation resource done remotely, but you're not expecting to do that forever. You might identify a certain kind of type of patient, but you expect to be able to jump on with a resource and then jump off at some point. The model depends on you being able to get off the But how do you decide that it's over? A lot of challenges.
Yeah, I would just say it's a difficult set of questions. These people don't necessarily fit in a box in a cancer center or in a community site. And so we really need to sort of shift the paradigm of our thinking in terms of care delivery.
And I think another challenge when they don't fit in the box is when you write a proposal, it's hard to come up with some pilot data, some descriptive data of this, right? Or the past literature doesn't really reflect what you need to be able to say to plan the trial.
Yes.
So, often sorry, I just started speaking, but this
Yeah.
is Dawn.
Yes.
One of the things that's challenging is that there's so much unknown that it can be challenging to write a grant because where do you start? And one of the things we have in SWOG is this huge network where we can collect data to really give us that even a cross-sectional kind of assessment of what we're seeing in a large swath of patients to understand some of these things that we don't even have like the baseline statistics in terms of how to power a study of people that were living 5 years out and what the fall off rate is and how you define that population, because to do an intervention, you need some preliminary data just in order to design the trial. And so often we don't think of cross-sectional studies in the group, but just we have this huge network where we could get really a rich data source to help inform future interventions to better characterize that population of long-term survivors of metastatic disease. It's something to think about.
Yes, definitely. That's one of the reasons why we included observational research in the RFA itself, because there is so much that is unknown. And I mentioned that we have some information on our Office of Cancer Survivorship website on data resources that include these populations, but there isn't anything that is sort of exclusively focused. And so if you were able to put together a rich resource that the researchers in the SWOG network could use, I think it could be very valuable.
I guess now you know why we had, as one of our methodologic focuses, prospective cohort studies and other descriptive stuff, right? It's not because that's our dream come true, but sometimes you just got to do it in order to get to where you really want to be. And even that depends on the thing that you're trying to characterize being more or less stable, right? We can't, if CIPN is fundamentally going to change in the course of a couple of years, then the cohort study doesn't do us any good. It has to be more or less an entity that's going to be lasting. But in this realm, this can change pretty quick, within 2 or 3 years. What you described might not be stable.
Yes.
A good problem to have, though, huh?
Yeah, so if anyone here, either in person or online, is interested, if they have a specific symptom or topic that they're interested in that may be applicable to this particular patient population, whether it's across all cancer survivors, whether it's within a specific disease subtype, please feel free to speak up and let us know. After the meeting or right after this meeting or after the overall SWOG meeting, either one is fine. But we do encourage people to please think about that. But we also would like to go forward and have Celine Jones is going to talk. She and Heather Greenlee have been working on a concept that is an intervention study specifically in patients who have metastatic cancer. And so we thought these two things would dovetail really nicely together. And so I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Jones.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Thank you. I have to apologize. My computer decided not to run Zoom this morning, so I am on my phone right now. So let me know if you have any problems hearing me or seeing me or anything like that. So I'm Celine Jones. I'll just go ahead and dive right in. I'm Celine Jones. I'm actually here on behalf of the PI for this proposed study, which is Dr. Heather Greenlee. And this proposed trial is going to be looking at acupuncture to decrease symptom burden in patients with metastatic breast cancer. Next slide, please. And so there are a lot of people, as we just heard, there are a lot of people living with metastatic cancer in the United States, and particularly metastatic breast cancer. The average patient with metastatic breast cancer is hormone receptor positive and HER2 negative. So this means that their typical treatment includes endocrine therapy plus a CDK4/6 inhibitor. They can also receive radiation for symptom management. And in the case of patients who are premenopausal women, they can also undergo ovarian suppression. So there's actually a very high symptom burden for people with metastatic breast cancer. This can be from the cancer, such as metastases on the bones or on the lungs, but it can also be from the side effects of treatment. And there are just some examples here listed on the slide. Next animation, please. The next animation. Thank you. So this high symptom burden is a problem because it then leads to low treatment tolerability and adherence, eventual treatment discontinuation, and ultimately shortened lifespan. So there's a great need to address this symptom burden in people with metastatic breast cancer. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this trial is proposing to use acupuncture to address that high symptom burden. It's a non-pharmacologic intervention. It's been studied quite a bit in oncology settings and has been shown to improve a variety of symptoms. And the kind of yellow-orange box on the screen there just has some examples of some of those symptoms that are improved by acupuncture. A study of patients undergoing BMT showed that acupuncture could also potentially reduce opioid use, and some preliminary studies have suggested that acupuncture could improve white blood cell count as well. Now, despite all this research in oncology studying acupuncture, no trial to date has yet looked at acupuncture as a method to improve symptom management in people with metastatic breast cancer. So by focusing on overall symptom burden and metastatic breast cancer, this proposal will address two important NIH NCI initiatives on metastatic breast cancer and pain, which is an important aspect of symptom management. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I wanted to talk really quickly about one of Dr. Greenlee's previous studies, S1200. And this trial showed that it was possible and feasible to conduct an acupuncture trial in SWOG. S1200 was a study of women with stages 1 through 3 breast cancer with moderate to severe pain. They were randomized to 1 of 3 arms, the treatment arm, which was true acupuncture, and 1 of 2 control arms, a sham acupuncture or weightless control. And Dr. Greenlee and her team successfully trained over 60 acupuncturists to deliver a standardized acupuncture protocol that was 12 weeks of treatment, and a follow-up lasted up to 52 weeks. The primary outcome was pain at 6 weeks, so in the middle of treatment. And there was indeed an effect where the true acupuncture improved pain more than the sham and the weightless control groups. But what I found particularly compelling about this trial and what is shown by the graphs here on the slide is that that effect was maintained at 24 and 52 weeks. So this is even after the acupuncture treatment had stopped. There was still an improvement in pain. So again, this trial shows that it is feasible to conduct an acupuncture trial in SWOG, and that there could be some benefit of acupuncture. Next slide, please. So this proposal, as I mentioned, is going to focus specifically on metastatic breast cancer. The control group is going to be a standard of care control group. For our primary aim, we'll be focusing on overall symptom burden at 12 weeks, so right at the end of the acupuncture treatment. And so for that reason, we're going to be using the MDOSI symptom severity scale as the primary outcome. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that acupuncture can affect a variety of symptoms. So if we looked at only one symptom, we might miss the full effect and the full benefit of acupuncture. So that's why we wanted to look at overall symptom burden and symptom severity. And then also we didn't want to focus for the primary aim on things like interference or function, because those might be a little bit further down the line. However, we will be looking at some of those outcomes for the secondary and exploratory aims. So for the secondary aims, we will be looking at 2 of those individual symptoms, pain and fatigue, 2 of the most common symptoms. We'll also be looking at symptom interference. So how much do these symptoms interfere with, say, day-to-day life, socializing, that sort of thing, quality of life, opioid use, and then also treatment tolerability. Oh, previous slide, please. Sorry. We're conceptualizing treatment tolerability as a treatment adherence in this case. And then for the exploratory aims, we'll be looking at white blood cell count, a couple other dimensions of quality of life and healthcare utilization. Next slide, please. So this is the study diagram. Of course, to be eligible for this proposed study, patients would have to have metastatic breast cancer, be on a CDK4/6 endocrine therapy within the prior 3 months. And then they also have to have a high symptom burden, which we're defining as having symptoms above a cutoff on 2 of those 13 symptoms, at least 2 of the 13. And then they'll be randomized to the acupuncture or standard of care group. The acupuncture will be a standardized protocol, but patients will be able to select 3 specific symptoms that they would also like the acupuncture to focus on. And we'll be collecting data at baseline 6 weeks, 12 weeks, and 24 weeks. As I mentioned, the MDASI symptom severity scale is going to be the overall symptom burden measure for the primary outcome. Items from the MDASI will also be used for the individual symptoms and the symptom interference scale. We'll also be asking participants to complete the FACT breast cancer scale. And so that has the 4 standard subscales from the FACT, but then also the breast cancer specific symptoms. So the physical well-being and the breast cancer specific symptoms will be part of the secondary outcomes. And then the other 3 subscales will be part of the exploratory aims. And for treatment tolerability, we're using a 3-item treatment adherence measure from Voiles. And then for exploratory outcomes, in addition to white blood cell count and the FACT subscales, we'll also be looking at number of office visits and nursing contacts. Next slide, please. So the sample size of 216 should give us decent power based off of these statistical assumptions. It should give us 85% power to detect a difference of 0.9 points on the MDASI. Just in case anyone's unfamiliar with the MDASI, each symptom is rated on that numerical rating scale, that 0 to 10 measure, and then they're averaged. And that 0.9 points is defined as a meaningful change in the MDASI user guide, which is why we powered for that amount of change. And then that sample size should also give us more than 80% power to detect a medium effect size for the secondary aims. Next slide, please. And so just a few logistics. The plan is to have 15 sites for this study. Site requirements would include either having an existing acupuncturist on staff or some community acupuncturists that they can refer patients to, or process where they are referring patients to community acupuncturists. And of course, sites will have to be able to complete other study activities such as data collection and attending monthly research coordinator meetings. The acupuncturists themselves will have to attend an online training. That's so that they can be trained in that standardized acupuncture protocol. And then the acupuncturist will also have to attend a monthly research acupuncturist meeting. So I wanted to ask a few questions of the room and just get a quick show of hands. Since I can't actually see the room, I was wondering if somebody can either, who is in the room, can just let me know how many people raise their hands in response to each question. Can just be a general count. First, I was wondering how many people have an acupuncturist on staff at their institution?
Yeah, 8 or 9 there.
8 or 9? Oh, okay. And then how many people have acupuncturists that they can, oh, thank you, now I can see the room. And how many people have acupuncturists that they can refer their patients to, or that they are referring their patients to? Looks like a couple. Okay.
Yeah, it's more than you think because you have a blocked view of some of the people raising their hand.
Okay. Was it maybe 10 to 12-ish?
Also, there are people online as well.
Okay. All right. Okay. And then last question, how many people would be interested in opening the study at their site if it was approved and funded? Maybe 5 to 10.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think that's right. It's more
Okay.
than 5. It's closer to 10, maybe more.
Closer to 10. Okay, so 10 plus. Okay. All right, and I will do my best to answer your questions. I may have to take them back to Dr. Greenlee, though, of course. I see some questions about billing or payments and funding. That is a good question. I am not sure about the billing and
Just to say what the question is, so a
Oh,
couple people in
sorry.
the chat asked questions about would acupuncture be paid for? And then the second part of that was if you don't have someone on your staff and you're using an outside acupuncturist, how would that be handled? And Dr. Hirschman has come up to the mic probably to enlighten us.
Yeah, so I imagine,
Okay.
so this is going to be done exactly the same way as our adjuvant trial in patients with non-metastatic cancer. And so the way that worked was that direct payments could be, each of the sites got that were doing it that got core resources, and they could either, use that to pay acupuncturists directly, like that were cover the cost of the acupuncturist on staff, or use it as a way of paying for external acupuncturists. So all of that was reimbursed. Yeah.
Hi, Krista Browning was from University of Hawaii. I am concerned. I know we did participate in Dr. Hirschman's study, but I am concerned about the community sites and being able to get an acupuncturist, or even if we had to find one, then having space to set up an acupuncturist in our clinics that would be accessible to patients.
I mean, I can tell you that most of the patients on 1200 went to external. They didn't have to get the acupuncture right there. So that wasn't an issue, and a considerable number of community sites participated.
So I have a question, obviously thinking about the patient population where ideally most, the average length of time that people are on this therapy is 2 years, but unfortunately there are women or men who don't respond for as long. And so therefore, with looking at 12 or 24-week time points, if they're going on study after they've already been on treatment for 3 months, I think is what you said. How are you going to handle the fact that patients may now be experiencing symptoms related to disease progression, or maybe changing their treatment either because of progression of disease, or because they didn't tolerate the therapy and they need to change to something different?
That's a good question. I might have to take that one to Dr. Greenlee, because I'm not sure about with the acupuncture protocol with the 3 symptoms that the patients can choose to focus on, whether or not those can change throughout the protocol, or whether it's like at the beginning they pick those 3 and then it continues, because that could potentially be one way to kind of address those sort of changing symptom needs. And as their treatments change, they might have different symptoms. So so I'm not sure about what the plan was for those. So, but I can check on that.
Okay. Quick question. Oh, sorry, Shwarya Subaya, Integrative Onc at MD Anderson. About the external community acupuncturist, from a feasibility standpoint, I can see the challenge not just in accessing certified acupuncturists, but really them participating in the research meetings that you're talking about or envisioning. And so there may be some room there to pre-select certified acupuncturists and potentially have either an asynchronous check-in or some other way, because these are all independent entities that aren't really contractually a part of this study in any way. And so there may be some consideration given to how you can feasibly engage a business, actually.
Yeah, no, that's a good suggestion about the asynchronous method. Yeah, because that might work a little better for people in private practice.
Yeah, and then there's one more question, or a couple more questions online. I know it's just moved, sorry. So now that since it's an unblinded study and there's a patient reported outcome endpoint, so subjective rather than objective, how do you actually plan to disentangle benefit due to acupuncture from a simple placebo effect?
That's a good question. I know in designing this study, there was a lot of back and forth about whether to do a standard of care control group versus, like a sham acupuncture group, or that sort of thing, similar to S1200. I think one of the issues with doing the sham acupuncture is that I don't think that NCCIH apparently they're no longer interested in funding or contributing to sham acupuncture trials at this point. So that was one consideration that went into that. So that is something to think about as far as with the control group that we had.
And then the final question, just for clarity, will there be strict guidelines that the acupuncturist must follow, or can acupuncturists treat according to their own treatment approaches?
That is a good question. That is one that I would have to check on. I'm sorry, I am not an acupuncturist,
Right.
so I'm not.
So just to be clear, I think this is designed exactly as S1200 was, and issues related to fidelity. There was especially amongst community acupuncturists were, we really paid a lot of attention to that in terms of the asynchronous. The acupuncturists were required to do check-ins to make sure that they were following the protocol, but that could be done with online testing. It didn't need to be done all exactly at the same time. So there was a lot of processes to try to conform, but work to engage them in the research up front. So people had to be actually registered through SWOG as a SWOG investigator. So it can't just be a random sending people to whoever you want. The actual acupuncturist had to be willing to be part of the study. And in terms of the second question, which was related to
Placebo?
no, there was something else that was just asked after that.
Can they use their own treatment approaches?
No, I mean, everything was really very prescriptive. So the way it was done is that there was a specific protocol, and then there were the acupuncturists had on top of that some flexibility based on the specific symptoms that the patients have.
Well, thank you so much for that presentation. I think it's a very interesting trial design, thinking about the patient population, and it does raise additional issues that you don't necessarily have to think of in patients who are being treated in the adjuvant setting. So we look forward to seeing how this goes. Just so everyone knows, the plan for this is for it to be R01 funded. They already have feasibility information about trying to conduct a trial like this in a cooperative group setting based on SWOG S1200. And so therefore, they're able to sort of go straight to an R01 to try to actually get the funding to support the acupuncturists and any other supplies and things that might be needed specifically to be able to launch the intervention. So we will turn next to Dr. Myers. So she is going to give us an update on her emerging from the HAZE protocol.
Good morning, everyone. So I was asked to give a brief update. This has been a journey for our cognitive rehabilitation intervention. Some of you have heard about this at previous meetings. This was a program that was developed by my good friend and colleague, Dr. Arash Asher at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. He is a survivorship rehabilitation specialist. And this intervention is to provide both didactic content as well as experiential content for people who have cognitive issues after cancer and cancer treatment. And the goal is to provide participants with a toolbox of strategies to mitigate those symptoms, but also to help them develop strategies to cope with the changes that they're experiencing. This is one. So we've done quite a little bit of pilot work. The first pilot that we talked about at previous meetings was conducted with breast cancer survivors. And you might remember at one point we had a title of S2008. We made it through the SWOG executive approval process, but we did not make it through the DCP steering council process. In that pilot, we did enroll women who had had chemotherapy for breast cancer, who had reported cancer-related cognitive impairment. And at that time, because it was delivered in person, there were people around a conference table receiving the content, but it was broadcast by telemedicine from Cedars-Sinai to us at 2 sites in Kansas. And we did see statistical improvement in people's perceived cognitive impairment as a result. So as we were incorporating reviewers' comments on that first round of submission, that's about the time COVID hit, and Cedars-Sinai switched from that completely in-person method around the conference table to all Zoom. So we decided to take advantage of a bad situation, and we did a single arm pilot study where we allowed really people with any type of cancer or any type of cancer treatment who were reporting cognitive issues to take part in that Zoom delivered live delivery program, and again got good results for moving the needle on perceived cognitive impairment. So the next step was what would really be feasible to take forward in a cooperative and group environment. And we decided that that live delivery, that real-time delivery of the program content had some limitations to it across time zones and sites and various needs. So the next step was to pilot whether the live delivery would be as effective as a pre-recorded delivery of the content that was shared virtually on Zoom, but facilitated by a trained group leader. And we compared that to wait list control. So 3-arm trial funded by the Oncology Nursing Foundation. We finished data collection just recently and are in the process of data analyses. But of the 92 people that we enrolled, we had very low attrition, only 10%, and it was evenly distributed across the 3 groups, which we were happy about. We did expand the patient population, though, to stage 1 through 3, solid tumor or Hodgkin disease or non-Hodgkin lymphoma, who had received chemotherapy and reported problems with cognitive function. So while we're in the process of conducting this pilot, we learned about this new grant mechanism, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about it last year's meeting and this year's meeting, which is the U34 planning grant mechanism, which allows investigators like myself who are in a situation where we still need to demonstrate certain things to prove that we can conduct this research within a cooperative group setting to accomplish those goals, and then hopefully write a competitive R01 to do the future efficacy trial. So we have been given permission to go ahead and apply for that U34 grant mechanism. And you can see some of our U34 planning activities outlined for you here on the slide. Things like developing the site materials, doing the site training, training the group leaders, getting all the approvals like central IRB. But one exciting thing we've decided to do in this next iteration is translate the intervention, both the video content and all of the written materials and the consents and the recruitment materials, into Spanish. Because so far we've only been able to reach English-speaking patients. And so we're missing a huge segment of the population that we serve. So we're very excited to having this incorporated should we get the funding and be able to go forward. One important thing about this grant mechanism, though, is you need to demonstrate robust stakeholder engagement, even prior to submitting the grant and then ongoing throughout the project. So we are in the forming advisory boards, particularly in the communities that serve Hispanic population, to make sure that when we do our translation, it's culturally appropriate for that population. But also important from a stakeholder perspective are the people at the sites who are going to be conducting the work. Is it really feasible? So we've got multidisciplinary involvement from people on the sites that plan to participate. We want to keep this as low burden as possible for participating sites to make it practical. And so the intervention will be centrally delivered. The patient-reported outcomes will be collected electronically via REDCap. And the current plan is to enroll 80 patients in that pilot, 60 of whom will be English speaking and 20 who will be Spanish speaking. We have bilingual group leaders identified who are interested in doing this with us. We are going to have a small amount of participant payment incentive. They're going to fill out 3 sets of questionnaires over the course of 14 weeks. And so we're going to give them $20 gift cards at each time point for a total of 60. We don't want to exclude anybody who doesn't have the right device or an internet plan or a cellular data plan. So we're hoping to include in the budget enough to have loaner iPads to provide to patients who need those to participate on Zoom or to do the red cap surveys. So we've talked about this design a little bit. The program used to be delivered once a week for 6 weeks in 2 to 2.5 hour sessions because people were having to drive in LA traffic to get to Cedars-Sinai. 2.5 hours on Zoom, maybe that's a little bit challenging. So we got some great feedback from that single arm pilot, and now the program's delivered once a week for 10 weeks, same content, but the sessions are closer to an hour or an hour and 15. You can see the session content on the far right. I won't go over that given the interest of time. You can see what patient-reported outcomes we plan to collect. I've already talked about eligibility criteria from a tumor perspective. We're going to mirror what we did in our recent pilot. Chemotherapy would need to have been finished within at least 6 months prior to starting the study, but not having finished more than 5 years out to try to have a little bit of homogeneity in terms of their treatment pattern. We found one really effective strategy for recruitment, though, for this type of intervention is to pre-assign the cohort start dates so that when a participant consents, they can choose what 14-week period they will be available. We found that's really helped with a low attrition rate. And the waitlist controls, after they finish their 14 weeks of data collection, they then get to attend the program, which makes it easier to recruit to because everyone gets to benefit from taking part. So here are the sites that we're planning to partner with for the feasibility pilot, should we be so lucky as to get the funding. We have an admission, a target submission date of June, which is keeping me up at night. You're allowed a 1 to 3 year modular budget. We're planning for the 3-year budget because the first 9 to 12 months will be to accomplish the planning activities. We'll have about 21 to 24 months for recruitment and for delivery of the intervention. The other piece of this mechanism is you need to build time into the funding period to then begin to develop your R01 so that you're ready to hit the ground running for the next submission deadline to take it forward to your future clinical trial. So hopefully the next time we talk, we'll have good news to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or come up to the mic. Just one question I do have is, knowing the topic of the conversation we had this morning, is there a reason you are excluding patients with metastatic cancer?
Great question. You know, our original premise for going with stage 1 through 3 was we knew we would not be able to enroll people who had CNS metastasis because of the potential impact on cognitive function. A consideration might be to expand that staging to allow higher stage disease as long as there wasn't CNS mets. I mean, we could consider that.
Yeah, I think you could consider it, particularly if they're off therapy. Like if you're not having any therapy for 6 months, you may be a metastatic survivor that would otherwise qualify, that didn't used to, you know, as in the course of your thinking, this wasn't really as much a thing as it is now, but it just, you know, to pull the thread from this morning.
Yeah,
I think that would work. Yeah.
that'd be exciting. I think that'd make a lot of people happy because that's a population that sometimes feels left out, right? So that would be very nice.
And admire the way that you and your team have navigated, you know, the science and the obstacles, you know, along the way, a step-by-step process, taking advantage of new mechanisms that kind of come to light in the course of the story. So it's been a great journey. Good work there.
Thank you. Our goal is to have it out there before we're using walkers.
Yeah. I was thinking about how, you know, sometimes successful science turns into a band, like the Checkpoints, you know, Jim Allison has his little band. And so Emerging from the Haze would be a good band name, I think. Maybe Weightless Control would be another band name, or that sort of thing. Just some ideas for the future.
And just one other thing, just to contrast from the one before. So this is an example of a study where they have good preliminary data, but the question is, can you really do it in a multidisciplinary group like SWOG? And I know that those of you who've been going to the other NCORE meetings have probably heard about this U34 mechanism, but there are R34 and U34 mechanisms out there specifically to work on the feasibility aspects of proposed ideas. So for example, if you have a pilot at your institution, which you know you have a good sense of the effect size of the intervention, you think it's likely to be something that is worth studying, but we don't know if we can actually do it in SWOG or in one of the other cooperative groups. This is a great mechanism to use. So any questions about it, please feel free to reach out to us. And next, we are going to turn our attention to Dr. Redamales from one of our Latin American sites, sorry. And he is going to talk to us about oral spore-based probiotics in pelvic radiotherapy for gyne malignancies. So this is a randomized pilot study that he is proposing. So welcome.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you to the Hope Foundation for the opportunity to be here, and basically because they made most of my career by now. So the idea is that the RTOE 1203 established the standard of care of postoperative radiotherapy in cervical and endometrial cancer, but up to 30% of the patients develop gastrointestinal symptoms. And probiotics analyzed by meta-analysis showed that they are very inconclusive about their results. The idea came to me because I'm really enthusiastic about fermenting foods and natural supplements and that. And I don't know if I have time for a small anecdote, but basically the spore probiotics are different from the lactic milk fermenters in the fact that they survive like almost everything, you know, survives the heat, survives the radiation. So I came to the idea, why not? If those strain of bacteria survives my freezer for a long time of exposure, maybe they're going to survive the radiation. So the idea is this. A lot of people still has gastrointestinal symptoms in the acute and long-term phase. And we know about the microbiome that there are some strains that are related to develop less adverse events in the gastrointestinal setting. So the classic probiotics are basically destroyed by the radiation and the pH changes and all the different changes that occurs during radiotherapy. So I came with the idea that spore-based probiotics are soil-based, not milk fermenters, and they were found to survive radiation and a lot of different environmental stress. So the idea was submitted for a young investigator program and was selected as concept. And after the week of work, we came with this idea that the study population will be the same of the RTOE 1203, pathologically proven diagnosis of endometrial and cervical cancer patients that underwent hysterectomy and planned radiotherapy without chemotherapy, just to not have the factor of the chemotherapy in the equation. Radiotherapy directed to the pelvis over a standard 5-week period. And the idea will be use the same instrument that was used in the RTOE 1203, the acute gastrointestinal toxicity measured by the EPIC instrument, and the EPIC bowel domain used as the primary endpoint. And the idea is to enroll 66 patients with a 10% dropout rate, with half of the patients in the US and the other half of the patients in Chile. A very pilot model of the things. And random assignment to either standard of care arm, that our standard of care is basically a booklet of foods during radiotherapy. We don't have a really good standard of care arm in the patients receiving radiotherapy. It's basically watch what you eat, and that's all. And the intervention will be the 6 tablets of BO3 that are basically 3 strains of spore-based bacteria, Enterococcus faecalis, Clostridium butyricum, and Bacillus mesentericus. And the pharmaceutical TOAP will provide the tablets free of cost. And the big bowel domain will be the primary endpoint. And this proposal was completed on the end of September, and then at December of last year, I submitted this concept for a seed grant, and I just received the feedback last month, and they found some weaknesses of the proposal. So I worked through this month about these weaknesses, and one of them was how successful are anti-diarrhea medication. Basically, I found that even if Imodium or loperamide is effective in 80% of the patients, there are some increasing reportings of risks using loperamide. For example, lung QT, and a growing evidence of loperamide misuse, because even if it's weak, it's still an opioid. The other thing is, so basically, if you can have the patients not developing toxicity without medication, I think that's better. Also, it's a really small pilot. That was one of the weaknesses that they told me. But the idea is just to show some trends for efficacy. We don't need a really huge sample for that, according to the people that has been helping me, Dr. Anger and Dr. Badia. Respecting the dietary counseling, every institution I know have like a booklet or something to plan the patients to watch what they eat, but still something that we can work with patient advocacy groups about what foods are acceptable during this period of time, this 5 weeks period of time. And also about the distribution cost. The distribution costs are not covered by the pharmaceutical company, but I make some call. I arrange some calls, and there's a preferred distributor from SWOG called McKenzie, so we can ask for a quote and incorporate that quote as a part of the budget. So thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thanks so much. Do we have any questions for Dr. Redemales?
Mark O'Rourke from Greenville. I'm thinking about the prostate cancer prevention trial that had drug intervention, but also gave everybody a vitamin along with it. And it was that way nobody felt left out. And I'm wondering if there might be something that would be good for diarrhea, good for the diet in general, that might be included in both arms to make it more attractive to enroll in the study. I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, we strictly speaking, we don't have a really good standard of care arm about the patients receiving radiotherapy. All institutions has different kind of recommendation that are told to the patients. Some sites use really low diet, low fiber diets, but there are some new reports that low fiber diets are in fact worse, because you need fiber to form the fecal mass. So strictly speaking, we don't know, and probably we will not be able to. I don't know, but I feel that we are not in a state that we can develop, for example, a strictly diet radiotherapy controlled trial, because you still don't know if what the patient is eating in the end at their houses. So that's the idea of the supplements. And also this kind of supplement is different because of the milk fermenters, because it doesn't, as it survives the heat, the pH changes. it doesn't require a temperature controlled storage. So distribution is easier because you can send the supplement to the patients and they can just storage them in their houses. You don't need temperatures stabilized or something that can compromise the activity of the bacteria.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad that you had a chance to acknowledge the Hope Foundation. I think that's very important. We're going to talk more about that at the end, but just kind of triggers my thinking about it being the 30th anniversary of the Hope Foundation and thinking chance to contribute maybe $30 or some multiple of $30 to keep the ball rolling in that realm. So we're going to move to the discussion of open trials, and we have these 4 open trials. We'll talk about ice compress for a moment. It's led by Dr. Melissa Accordino, and it's a collaboration with a lot of different people, as you see in the slide, including colleagues from the Alliance and NRG. Dr. Accordino couldn't be with us today, but I think this is a really good example of a high impact interventional trial in a focused area that builds on the not only pilot data of this particular intervention, but pilot data from S1714. So this is the kind of thing we're striving to do. The primary objective is to compare the proportion of participants who develop clinically meaningful CIPN based on this absolute increase of 8 points over the baseline from the particular measure, the CIPN 20, and the time point is at 12 weeks. And you can see that there are a handful of secondary objectives as well as outlined on this slide. And then we're ambitious, so we have exploratory objectives looking at tolerability and device satisfaction. And we're also collecting correlative science in a biobank development so that we can propose other questions in the course of time. So this is the schema. As you can see, their patients are starting on taxane who haven't already had neurotoxic chemo or have pre-existing neuropathy, randomized to the cryocompression, continuous compression, or low cyclic compression. And this slide here summarizes the eligibility of the different regimens and prior treatment. And the PROs are in English and in Spanish, and a few exclusions that you would predict. Again, prior neuropathy, open wounds, things that would make cryocompression or low cyclic compression or continuous compression difficult. A few details about, just what we mean by cryocompression in terms of the temperature and the cyclic pressures per study arm. And so this is always a fun slide with a bunch of green check marks as we progress. And so we're on the home stretch, right? This is about ready to open up. It's a site limited trial. So the sites that are participating are ready to go and getting trained and getting local IRB approval. So we're ready for a liftoff, and it's been a great journey to this point, and we really look forward to conducting the trial and addressing this really important question. And I don't know if there's any questions about this.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions or has been encountering any difficulty as they get this study open at their site. We do thank all the sites that are in the room who are participating in this limited institution site. Unfortunately, because of logistics with the machines, we weren't able to open it to every site that wanted to participate.
Question. Sure. Really, it's not related to the taxanes, but it's the carbo. Obviously, there is a national shortage going on right now with platinums. Do we perceive any problems coming up? Certainly, our worry is not having it for our patients that are being treated with curative intent at the moment. But I would also hope that there wouldn't be any issues with patients who may have a delay or may have issues with the carbo shortage that's going on currently, if they're enrolled in the trial in the next couple of months. Hopefully it'll be resolved by then, but just to keep that as a thought and concern.
That's a fair question. I don't know, Dawn, do you have anything to say about the shortages?
I mean, obviously, I think we all hope that the carboplatin shortage will be over. I mean, I think, you know, if somebody's on study and they miss it, they're on, you know, a TC, you know, whether it's paclitaxel carbo or docetaxel carbo, and one of the carbos is missed because it's not available, then it's not available, you know, then it's something,
Yeah.
it's, I mean, then you just mark it, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's more of a problem if there's a shortage and people replace the drug, right? So these are not situations where people are gonna, you know, use some other drug in place and therefore they wouldn't be eligible. They'd either get the carbo or not. And then we might deal with some of that analytically, but I think you're probably not gonna hold the therapy, right? So you probably go forward with what you can do. And so I expect it will be more of an analytical issue than an eligibility and enrollment issue. Yeah. All right. Next up, S2010, Dr. Henry.
So thank you very much. So this is another study that opened since our last group meeting. So this is called Aspen. It's a randomized phase 3 trial comparing active symptom monitoring and patient education versus patient education alone in young women with high-risk stage 1 through 3 breast cancer. It did not work. Yep. Sorry about that. So the primary objective here, as everyone has heard before, is looking at, can we improve persistence with therapy in this patient population? Because we know that 20-25% of patients who are treated with endocrine therapy will actually end up discontinuing treatment mostly because of side effects. So we want to try to improve that. And we also want to see, can we improve symptoms themselves? We want to see, are we improving adherence? So are people actually taking it as prescribed, not just sticking with it for a period of time? And then we want to try to understand which are the patients that are most likely to stop treatment, and also which ones are most likely to benefit from an intervention such as active symptom monitoring. This is a schema. It's relatively straightforward. Patients who are starting or who recently started endocrine therapy undergo baseline evaluation, get randomized, and then are followed every 3 months, either in person or in virtual visits, out to 72 weeks. And then there's one follow-up phone call to see what patients are still doing. We do have optional blood draws that I'll talk about at some of those visits. So the eligibility, this is stage 1 through 3 hormone receptor positive breast cancer. Women have to be pre or perimenopausal at the time of diagnosis. And most of the questions that I've received have been related to these eligibility criteria. So again, it's if someone said that she was having periods within 12 months, then before her diagnosis, she would be eligible. If she has not been having menses for some reason, she had a hysterectomy, she had a uterine ablation, an IUD, it's okay to use estradiol or FSH locally drawn, but those are not required if someone had been having menses. And then one key thing is that patients do have to be planning ovarian suppression as part of their treatment. I've had a number of questions from sites that are, well, a lot of our patients just go on tamoxifen. And yes, we would like to try to improve the persistence of patients with tamoxifen as well, but they have a lower rate of treatment discontinuation. And so we're really focusing on this group of patients who are at highest risk of stopping their treatment. So that's why we were requiring that. And I'll talk in a slide about what our definition is of ovarian suppression. We left it a little flexible, so you can be on tamoxifen or an aromatase inhibitor. Those are standard of care. You can have started it up to 2 weeks before people go on treatment or up to 2 weeks after. And you do have to have access to an internet or a telephone. The standard of care treatment, as I just mentioned, it's totally physician discretion. It's whichever one you would like to do, but you do have to use it in conjunction with suppressing the ovaries. And so if someone decided for some reason to have her ovaries removed, say she has a BRCA mutation, that would be acceptable. If somebody has ovarian function and they didn't get chemotherapy, then you do need to be giving a GnRH agonist concurrent with the endocrine therapy, or they have to be undergoing surgery. But then finally, if somebody has chemotherapy and they have chemotherapy-induced ovarian failure, you're not obligated to use GnRH agonist therapy in that situation. But there needs to be an intent that if her ovaries wake up after chemo, that you're planning to initiate GnRH and not just have her on tamoxifen and follow her. So we are clarifying the protocol to specifically say when you do and do not have to be checking estrogen during all of these, but really you do have to be on ovarian suppression. So all patients are given a handout that has 3 URLs and QR codes on it related to symptom management, breast cancer in general, and healthy living and heart health. It's from the American Heart Association. They have standard of care clinic visits that can be either in person or virtual. There are patient-reported outcomes that everyone is completing on paper at each visit. So at least for right now, the way we were told we had to do it is patients, if they're not seen in person, if they're seen virtually, that you have to actually send them the paper questionnaires, get them to fill them out and send them back, either via email, fax, or mail. We are going to evaluate whether or not those instructions are what we have to do to make it easier for the patients. But for right now, unfortunately, you can't just ask the patient the question over the video visit. There are optional but highly encouraged blood draws at baseline, 12, 48, and 72 weeks. And then, as I said, there's one phone call at the end just to assess persistence. So the way the intervention works, we're asking 6 questions. This is looking at joint pain, hot flashes, vaginal dryness, insomnia, sadness, and fatigue. Single item, very quick. It's very quick if it's done on the internet. So you would get an email, get a link, and just answer on a 1 to 5 scale. If there's no concerns, not reporting anything severe or a lot worse than before, then nothing happens. You just get the next set of questions the next week. However, if someone does have a value that's above threshold, then the site is notified. You can reach out to the patient, find out, hey, what's going on, and then decide if you want to do anything to manage their symptoms, or maybe it's something that you've already been working with them on. I have a patient on the study, her value was high for joint pain, but I already knew that I'd had a discussion with her earlier in the week about joint pain. So we didn't reach out to her again. We just filled out the little questionnaire that said, no, we didn't reach out to her. And then we continue to work on it. So we're trying to make the burden as low as possible for the sites. And so it's up to you, your standard practice for what you would do to manage a symptom. We just are trying to record what people do at the individual sites. To get started, at least one staff member at the site does have to complete the ProCore training. ProCore is the site that is being used that sends out these texts and emails to people. Once you activate at your site, at least one person, but ideally more than one for redundancy, will actually have access to the site. And so you just have to give us the first and last names and CTEP numbers so that we can get people logged in and get your site activated on the ProCore website itself. It is not the intent that all of the clinicians who are treating the patients will be looking in the ProCore website. Ideally, this is CRAs, potentially data managers. There is a pre-recorded SIV training available. The training for the site personnel is on the CTSU class website. And there's also a frequently asked questions that we've been updating as we get more information that's available on that site as well. There's a few other things I wanted to mention right now. We are having difficulty with texting that we are working on. And so right now, the only options are email, which you get emailed the link, or the IVRS phone, which admittedly takes a lot longer because you have to listen to them actually read the question to you. So if someone has internet access, I would recommend email. We now have Spanish launched as of last week, so both English and Spanish are available. And then the other two things, one is we will be having a monthly meeting just for site personnel, whoever's able to attend, just to, troubleshoot, brainstorm, things like that if there are issues. And finally, the other question I get is, can people be on these other treatments as well as endocrine therapy? Can you be on abemaciclib? Can you be on trastuzumab or TDM1? And the answer is yes. All of that is spelled out in the protocol that those concomitant therapies are permitted. There's also the possibility of being co-enrolled in other clinical trials, as long as the other clinical trials are not treating with new, experimental therapies where there's a ton of extra visits and things like that, but things that are looking at standard of care or altering radiation or something like that are permitted. So any questions from anybody? Anyone want to talk about experience that they've had screening for patients or with patients on the trial?
Hi, thank you. I'm Hildy Dillon, patient advocate in lymphoma. I'm just wondering, are you also capturing if people reveal that they're having trouble with adherence? That they didn't take their pills or they're not, it happens, that people are not taking their medicine the way they're supposed to? Are you just sticking to those 6 questions and that's it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So on the actual weekly assessments, which then switch to every 4-week assessments for the patients who are randomized to the active symptom monitoring intervention, we are only asking about those symptoms. At the every 3-month visits that every patient who's participating completes, the PRO questionnaires, we are asking about adherence in addition to symptoms. So we are using the Voiles measure. I know it was mentioned with a different study earlier today. That asks 3 questions really about, were you able to take your medicine as prescribed? And then if you answer that you missed any time, then there's a list of about 24 different things that people can look at and try to get at exactly why they missed. Did they miss because they forgot their pill, they just forgot it, or they didn't have the money, or, a lot of different reasons. So we are capturing that. And then we also, as part of the blood that we're collecting, we are planning to look at drug levels of either the drug or metabolite to be able to get a sense of how much are people actually adhering to taking the medication. That's the Canto trial that was done in France. They looked at that for tamoxifen. And so we're adopting the same approach. So yes, we are objectively and subjectively.
Just a quick question with when it says a provider will reach out to the patient, and would that include we oftentimes will have nurse triage that reaches out? Does that include that, or would it need to be directly a mid-level provider or physician based on the protocol?
Yes, that's a great question. So the workflow related to how you want to handle those symptom alerts, we are leaving totally up to the sites. So it could be, it can be the clinic nurse, it can be a research nurse, it could be the mid-level provider, or it could be the physician, but really it is totally flexible. We are capturing who reaches out. So we tried to make it as simple as possible. So who reached out? When did you reach out? Did you reach the patient? Yes or no? And if you did you make any, what was the recommendation? And then it's new drug therapy, new non-drug therapy, didn't recommend any changes, or physical therapy or other, I think. So we're trying to make it as straightforward as possible. Great question. So are there anything online? I can't see that.
One thing online here is a question that says providers do not recommend follow-up as frequently as the study requires. We were told that a phone call with a research nurse would not be an appropriate substitute and would be a deviation. Are there any plans to change the follow-up schedule?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. We are actually talking about that today. And so we realize that there are some patients who are only seen every 6 months. And so we're considering changing that to make it easier. And so we will be following up with everybody based on that. The other thing I wanted to say is that the way it is currently written is that patients would be following up every 3 months. It does not have to be with medical oncology. It could be with radiation oncology. It could be with surgery. It just says with a cancer provider is the way it's currently written in the protocol. But definitely keep making these suggestions because, you know, we write trials sometimes based on how we do things. And if other groups do things differently, we don't want that to be a barrier to enrollment. We want to do what we can to be flexible because it's sort of kind of a pragmatic trial, but not quite. But I thank you. If you have any questions, please reach out. And I would like to encourage everyone to please enroll patients on our trial.
Great. So next up, we'll talk about S2013, and Dr. Gunturu will take us through the iCheckIt update.
Thank you very much. So it's S2013, as many of you have been hearing about it from the last few sessions, and also many of you as it opens. So I'll quickly go through the trial design. The primary hypothesis is looking at the risk prediction model for immune therapy in people who are getting solid tumors with ICI. So this one is mainly for immune checkpoint inhibitors and not for combination. So just wanted to pause here and identify, like, we're at a midpoint for this accrual. We're at halfway. And this is only possible with our patients and caregivers, their altruistic nature to enroll into the trials, not for them, for future, and to contribute to the science. And also for our sites who are going through resources, limited resources. And thank you very much for enrolling and making this successful. So just to give you a breakdown, so we activated right in the middle of the pandemic in 2021. Now we're at 2023, and many of our trials have been struggling to accrue patients, and all of you made it possible to accrue to this trial. And as you can see here, our accrual in the last month is 97 per month. Just pausing there. 97, it is great for this trial. And if you look at the breakdown for melanoma, it's 283, lung cancer almost close, and others, including renal cell, urothelial, colon, are the top accruals. Just to give you a study calendar, we have this baseline, and then at like 4 different time points, week 4, 12, 24, and 52. And at development of grade 3 or higher toxicities. These are the times where we're taking information about the PROs, concomitant medications, their CTCAE, also baseline labs, only if the sites are doing, if the primary team is doing it, we're not requiring them to make anything extra. We're requiring, we're asking for the baseline tissue. If there is any, they do not need to undergo any further tissue biopsy. Blood is at baseline and also at 4-week time point. And we're adding microbiome, which is coming to the sites in the next month. So if they develop any grade 3 or higher toxicities, then they would be taking information, we'll be taking information at the PROs and also blood at the same time, and microbiome too. So blood, again, it's optional. So we're encouraging for sample submission. And our plan is to evaluate for the cytox score, which is 11 different cytokine levels, looking at all these measures, composite measures, both prior to the immune checkpoint inhibitors and also after cycle 1, as a predictive signature for the development of the IRAEs. This would also help us as a repository for future archival tissue and blood or plasma specimens, which we can use it as a potential predictive and prognostic markers for IRAEs. So again, 2 main time points, and if they develop any grade 3 or higher toxicities. The microbiome portion of this trial is coming next month. And this is to evaluate at baseline what the microbiome composition is and the metabolomics with the risk of development with the IRAEs. We'll see not only at the baseline and how over time it will be changing and how it is contributing to the grade 3 IRAEs. So this is something as a team we participated, took advantage of NCI Research Studio. Thanks to our study chairs for bringing this opportunity. We're trying to increase the diversity and equity in our trial participation. And this is NCI Research Studio and Corp Research Studio is a series of integrated dynamic roundtable discussions to bring together people from different aspects of research and how we can increase the diversity in clinical trial accruals and participation. It helps in developing the sound study recruitment and retention, not only just the recruitment and how we retain all of our patients for the cancer control and symptom management studies. It also increases the engagement of underserved population in clinical research, whether it's based on sex, gender, or in rural, like based on geography, if they have like limited by cancer care access. So what I want to ask you next is how we can increase the minority and rural enrollment. So there are currently, so that's the first question I would like to ask all of you, and please actively participate in the discussion. This is the study for you to help you, aid you in your clinical daily practice for our patients. And the other question is we've been asked about adding another, because there are more treatments are coming with the combinations, whether it is chemo or targeted therapy in combination with the ICI. When this trial was in inception, we intentionally kept it to immune checkpoint inhibitors alone because we wanted to decrease the heterogeneity in the population. Now we are seeing more and more combination treatments. So would you like to have another cohort to check it for combination chemo and or targeted therapy? That's the first question. If it is open, would your site enroll? What are the barriers do you see? I'd like to invite you all, both in person here and online, to comment or give your feedback with your expertise and what you're experiencing at the front lines.
Well, thank you, Krishna. Mark, you have a question here?
I'll make a comment. Mark O'Rourke from Greenville. I think it's a good idea to open combination arms. The treatment has changed so much just in the last 2 years. There was all kinds of therapy, renal cell carcinoma now, combination, oral therapy and the immune therapies. We need to keep our database changing with the changing practice. So I think it's highly appropriate to add a new arm.
Thank you, Dr. O'Rourke.
I'll also just say that online, it was mentioned that the Alliance study that's sort of similar is including chemo containing regimens. So, I think this is something that we've started discussing internally. And so we have not yet reached out to the NCI to discuss this. So we don't know if it's a possibility, but certainly if there are specific regimens you would be interested in looking at that aren't likely to be competing with a lot of other available clinical trials. So we would have a large enough patient population, please feel free to speak up.
Just more of a comment, I think, on the being on the treatment side of this. Eric, I'm a physician assistant in Green Bay. Just in regards to a lot of these trials that are looking not necessarily on treatment, but looking from the patient's perspective, one of the biggest things that I hear is when offering some of these side effect trials is, how is this going to help people, down the road? And I think one good thing with studies and in general, when we have the schema out and everything is, saying how exactly is this going to help people in the future? That's like the common thing I hear over and over. So if I ever saw anything like, and it's not a barrier or anything else, but just bolded saying like, your work in this study will help researchers this. And because there's so much on those pieces of paper that has to be included. And I think overall there's a good job, especially one of the first paragraphs is that, but if there was ever a way just to have a one-line thing that said, by participating in this, you will help researchers XYZ. I think that's just something that could help in these things in general. So I don't know if that's ever anything that's talked about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric, for the comment. So one thing I want to highlight here is with the digital engagement team, we worked on the social media toolkit. So if you follow at the bottom, as you can see, I check it on Twitter. We also developed for patients and investigators alike information and how this helps for the study too. Thank you very much.
Hi, Amy from Crown Consortium. For the dual treatments, you might just want to look at the URCC Direct trial because it's going to probably overlap with it and what they're looking at. So they're looking at allowing 2 different treatments. You can have immunotherapy with another combination treatment, and it can be another ICI. So you just might want to look at that as an overlap.
Thank you for that comment. So we were working closely with the Direct study, which is the UICC study that you just mentioned. So one difference, we also reached out to our NCORE site members. That study is not open for under the NCTN. No, not NCTN. So we can still enroll. It would not clash. So.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And so we appreciate the comment. We are very cognizant of what other studies are doing. The other thing, 2 things came in online as well that are just asking, can we, in order to try to increase accrual of minority patients, can we please change, include more languages? And so, that is certainly something that we can consider as long as the questionnaires are available in those languages. So it's something we'll talk about internally. And then one other person has just commented on my barrier is transportation. And unfortunately, that is something that it's very challenging to deal with. But at least we tried to make the study as straightforward as possible. So it'd be easy to enroll patients and collect samples and things at a site close to their home, depending on what's available. So, but thank you for your comments.
Yeah, I was thinking of how transportation might connect to the other question about how somebody explains, like, I'm getting a ride to this appointment to follow up for the study, and being able to explain to the person giving them a ride or a family member, what is that for, right? So just helping patients have the language to understand for themselves and to explain to others that are sort of part of their plan to participate. Yeah. Well, so next up.
Sorry, Dr. Fish, I just wanted to mention for this particular trial, in addition to the social media toolkit, there's also a plain language summary. So that should be very helpful to explain to the participant the reasons for for participating on the trial and to their family members.
Thank you. I saw the nice display of all the plain language summaries from the Hope Foundation. So that's fantastic. So S1600 is our trial that's led by Dr. Hamilton Reeves, and is Dr. Hamilton Reeves, is she on the line? No, I don't know if she's able to present. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I'll just take us through this just to let you know that we're on the home stretch here. This thing was activated in February of 2019, and we've enrolled 172 of the 200 patients. And so we're on the home stretch. This is a study this is one of those sort of wild card studies, a little asterisk, an opportunity to study post-surgical complication rates and how they might be intervened upon based on an immunonutrition trial. And so it's a limited institution for trial with surgeons that do radical cystectomies largely participating. And we're almost done. And we appreciate those who have been participating and helping with this trial. I'm going to skip to. So just to let you know, just in general, we're on the home stretch here, but we have correlative studies going on with previously closed trials, which include SO702, another trial that was, I guess you could call it a wild card trial where we're looking at a particular toxicity ONJ. And there's correlative research going on still with S1714, the CIPN observational study. And our other closed trial, S1614, just being acknowledged here. I'm going to skip S1714 for now and take a moment to acknowledge our SWOG study champions. We have identified people who are study champions for other group trials, including the Alliance trial and ECOG trial, as you see here. So Dr. Govinda Jaran and Dr. Johnson have been generous to be our study champions for the respective Alliance trial and in the ECOG trial. And so do we have another point to make on study champions? No. Well, we'll finish up by just acknowledging our patient advocates. Dr. Amy Geschwender has been a fantastic patient advocate for our committee. You didn't get to hear from Amy at this meeting. She wasn't able to attend, and in fact, it's the end of Amy's term, and we wanted to really recognize her. What's that? In the fall, yeah, in the fall, in November, her term ends. So she's on the home stretch, and there's other advocates who are hitting their term limits that are acknowledged here on this slide as well. And so you gotta love term limits in the theoretical, but it's a little bit sad when people's term limits come on. But we really appreciate their contributions. But the beauty of term limits is you get to welcome new people. And so we welcome some of our new research advocates as well. Tricia Hernandez, Karen Costello, and Daryl Nakagawa. Oh, it's changing up here. We have a delay here, so I should stand up here. It'd be much easier. Also acknowledging Hildy Dillon and Rick Bangs in terms of being research advocates whose term limits are, this spring. And there is some recruitment and selection process for a PAC chair and vice chair underway in the advocacy realm as well. So definitely acknowledge and appreciate that whole crowd. And we talked about part of the process for our committee involves taking it all the way across the finish line and then disseminating the information that we learn. And so just letting you know that S1714 has involved a presentation at San Antonio this past fall, and will be an oral abstract at the ASCO meeting. Dr. Trivedi will be presenting. So very exciting to present some of those results. S1200 that was mentioned earlier by Dr. Hirschman, there's a long-term follow-up manuscript published in JEMA Network Open, and some other work with our PRO core committee and PRO analyses related to the responder trial with participants from this committee. And we mentioned the Hope Foundation and the 30th anniversary with encouragement to be aware of the funding opportunities that you can take advantage of, the pilot programs, early exploration and sort of seed funds, impact programs, and a chance for all of us again to contribute to the funds of the SWOG of the Hope Foundation, particularly in appreciation of this 30th anniversary. And I encourage you to look at the messaging toolkit around this and help promote the Hope Foundation's flourishing. And there's a call for Hope board members. If any of you are interested in serving the Hope Foundation as a board member, you can scan this sort of thing and apply and look into that. You can follow the Hope Foundation on Twitter as well. And then there are some grant opportunities just to be aware of. Dr. Henry mentioned the R34 and the U34 mechanisms, and there's a notice of special interest here from the Division of Cancer Prevention. There's R50 Research Specialists, Clinician Scientists Awards. And, you know, if you have interest in looking for other mechanisms, feel free to email or talk to Dr. Henry or I, and we can also help you navigate the different options.
Yeah, and the one other thing I wanted to mention is if anyone in the room is interested in AYA cancers, they are looking for liaisons from Symptom Management Committee to the AYA group. So, you know, if you know anyone or if you yourself are interested, please speak up. It really is just trying to help foster communication between the two groups as we develop studies.
Well, thanks a lot for your participation. Enjoy the rest of your time here in San Francisco.
Yeah, thank you so much.